Today we're going to be looking at nurturing your self-esteem, and we're going to be looking at different ways of doing that today. So I just want to welcome you to this workshop. So I'm going to do a little cheeky slide now, and I just wonder whether you actually are going to notice the problem with what's written here for you. I wonder if you can spot it. It says, "Thou shalt love thyself as thy neighbour." Actually, the Lord doesn't tell us to do that, does he? In that commandment, he says we should love our neighbours as ourselves. And I think that's indicative because the Lord actually expects us to already have good self-esteem and already be able to love ourselves. So the Lord asks us because he's kind of expecting us to have that. But in this day and age, nurturing our self-esteem is pretty difficult, actually. We've got all sorts of things coming towards us. So nurturing healthy self-esteem. Well, if we're to follow this great commandment of love thy neighbour as thyself, as the Saviour teaches us, we know that the Saviour teaches us in Corinthians that love is patient, love is kind, and this means that in our own journey in acquiring healthy self-esteem, we need to be patient and we need to be kind to ourselves as well as others. Now, we also learn that the Saviour really wasn't afraid to invite others to leave their old ways behind and embrace new teachings. Now, this is really evident when he invited Peter and James to leave their old jobs and as fishermen to become fishermen of men. So we can ask, well, I'd like us to be able to ask ourselves this evening if we can both be bold and loving as we now hopefully invite ourselves and other members of families and friends to make a positive change in our lives, to embrace healthy self-esteem and follow the Saviour's commandments. However, a word of caution here. There's more than one type of self-esteem, and the one that we really want to avoid is the one that's inflated. So we definitely don't want inflated self-esteem, because if we have this, we think that we're better than other people, and we have no doubt about this. We underestimate every other person that's around us. Inflated self-esteem, if we have this, we find it really difficult to establish affectionate and healthy relationships. Now, what we really want to do for these people, because they're not going to find happiness, it's going to be really difficult for them to achieve happiness with this kind of attitude. So people with inflated self-esteem, they're characterised perhaps, but they're quite irritable usually to be around. They're very unable to critique themselves, and they're constantly blaming other people for things that go wrong, and they tend to also undervalue people around them. Sometimes they're quite hostile actually to be around. So we don't want that type of self-esteem. What we really want is a really high and healthy self-esteem. So people with this type of self-esteem, they accept and value themselves. They are assertive in expressing what they need. They're confident in their abilities to make decisions. They're able to form secure and honest relationships. They're much less likely to have unhealthy relationships. And they have quite a realistic expectation and quite able to be able to critique themselves and look at themselves and think that what they might have been able to do better. So today we want to look at those aspects of ourselves which where we might suffer a little bit of low self-esteem. So we want to build that up. When we're living with low self-esteem, this can be very mentally and emotionally harming. It can lead to problems such as depression, anxiety, and it actually can cause you to develop even addictive habits as a way of coping really with those difficult feelings. So some of the causes of low self-esteem begin, unfortunately, in childhood. Our teachers, friends, siblings, parents, even the media send us both positive and negative messages about ourselves. And for some reason, we all sort of tend to focus on those negative ones, and they seem to stay with us. It's messages such as, "You're not good enough," or we can sometimes find it really difficult to live up to other people's expectations of ourselves, or maybe too much expectation of our own expectations. So we can have stressful or difficult life events. This can also lead to serious illness, bereavement. This can have a negative effect on our self-esteem as well. So ongoing stressful life events such as relationships, financial problems, any kind of negative that can also affect your self-esteem. Now, it's true actually that personality can also play a part in. So some people are just more prone to negative thinking, while others will set impossibly high standards for themselves. So some of the signs of low self-esteem might look like being a little bit extra sensitive to criticism, whether by yourself or others. You might be a little bit more hostile around other people. You might be a little bit preoccupied with your own personal problems and issues that are going on with you. You can even suffer with some sort of physical symptoms, such as tummy aches, things like that. And also shyness can be a problem in self-esteem. So having low self-esteem can lead to a low mood and anxiety and other emotional struggles. So that's really unfortunate. We don't want that. So if we can battle the self-esteem now, we can almost avert having a truly low or truly difficult anxiety. So it's important to work on our self-esteem, just as we would work on any important physical part of our body. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to take part in a poll. I'm going to suggest to you, maybe get your phone, and there are 7 questions, and I want you to write next to the question your answers, because as you do this poll, this is being recorded and you'll be able to use this as your absolute starting point. And then when you want to, you can come back at this, and because the poll's right at the beginning of this, you can then look at those answers and see if you've shifted in one way or another. The poll will be anonymous. I shall launch it in a minute for you. Now, when you do this poll, you're going to be answering questions about self-esteem. So I want you to exercise absolute, just take it easy on the self-judgment. Don't be harsh on yourself. This is just to help you to determine where your personal starting point is. And in this poll, it will acknowledge both your strengths and your weaknesses, okay? So as I said, just remember, just pop a pencil or pen and put the number 1. And if you put never, just put number 1 and never, okay? And this is your starting point. And everything I teach you tonight, it'll be really, really useful to see where your strengths are and where you might need to do a tiny little bit of work. Now I'm just going to share the results with you. So you should just see those results. I think you can see the result. I can just leave them here actually while I talk through them for you. Okay, so thank you for all of you that have answered these. And remember, this is a snapshot in time, this poll. So we're just looking at where you are today. Okay, so things will change and you might have had a good week, a bad week, doesn't matter. This is just where you find yourself today. So as a group, we're going to look at that. It's quite nice sometimes just to see where you are as a group. So when we're thinking about self-esteem, and our first question is, I feel like I can handle problems if I work hard enough. So some of us feel like no, some of us feel most of the time we can. So we've got a good 30% of you can. And then we've got this sort of middle area here where some of us feel that we can or we can't, okay? I can manage unexpected events that come up. This is kind of really tricky sometimes. So 5% of us are really struggling with that, and 24% of us are occasionally sometimes in that bracket. And there's a few of us here that seem to most of the time manage it. So well done to that lot. But the majority of you, often you can manage it, but that's great. So number 3 is, I spend a lot of time trying to handle my fears and my doubts. And this comes up, this is a very common one when we're dealing with self-esteem, is that often it's really self-esteem is about fear. And here we've had nearly half of you are on in the often bit here, okay? You have some concern, and there's quite a few of you here. That's a real problem, okay? So number 4 is, I'm comfortable with and do well under pressure. So some of us really don't function well under pressure. Some of us, we're okay if we kind of know what we're doing. And there are always a big chunk of us that actually up here that we kind of like a bit of pressure, because we have enough adrenaline and enough kind of stress. There's a good stress that helps us to perform really well. So we've got a few of you here as well, and then some of us it's a good stress and some of us it isn't, so that's interesting. So number 5, asking for help is easy for me. Well, I would hope that it would be easy. So this 14% that is really tough, and even the occasional is quite a chunk down here. And none of you have kind of popped it up here, which would be really great if I could get you all to ask for help when you need it. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's difficult, okay? So this workshop is definitely going to help all of you that have arrived today. Now, my thoughts paralyze me from moving forward. So here we've got a good quarter of you that actually that's not a problem. So that's great. And then we have occasional, and then we have here 38% of you, the majority of you, it sometimes happens to you. So that's problematic as well. Again, this workshop's going to help you because we will address your thoughts in this workshop. So the last question here is, I feel concerned if someone doesn't like or approve of me. Well, that's great here, the 5% that don't have that problem. But over half of us do have that problem. And this is a lot to do with our inner critic, which I'm also going to share with you as well. And I just want to tell you a little bit. So remember I said get a pen and paper, and I asked you to just pop it down. So what I want you to know is that if you mostly chose never or occasionally, then you're doing a great job, okay? And this workshop will help you build a strong sense of self-confidence, and it will deepen your self-esteem practices and improve relationship with yourself, okay? Now, if you mostly answered in the occasionally and the sometimes, you're in a good place to recognize some quick growth here. Although sometimes your skills and accomplishment, you might focus more on what you should be doing better. And this workshop will give you tips and skills and help you to identify those practices and build some of those overlooked areas that you've got. Now, for some of you, there are quite a few in this bracket. If you chose often and most of the time, then you're likely hoping for more confidence and more self-esteem. And this workshop is going to help support you in having more compassion for yourself and being able to help you to nurture yourself beyond the obstacles that set you back, okay? So this workshop is going to help you understand how to set some goals and use your strengths and your skills and your talents, okay? So that's the poll done. A little bit further into the workshop. Also, I want to show you what's possible here today, okay? If you work on your self-esteem, then this is what's possible. So by taking part in the poll, this would have helped you to identify your starting point. Now you know. Here, I'm showing you what's possible if you work on your self-esteem, okay? You will like and enjoy and value yourself. You'll make better decisions. You'll understand your strengths, your weaknesses. You'll be able to show kindness and compassion towards yourself. You'll have the idea that you definitely are good enough and that you matter. You'll be able to handle mistakes without blaming yourself or others in an unfair manner. And you'll be able to have assertiveness. And that assertiveness without feeling full of guilt or feeling upset in any way. So you'll discover what you need and desire and learn to believe that you do deserve the things in life that you are deserving. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about a difference between confidence and self-esteem, okay, because they are different. Now, self-confidence and self-esteem, they're human characteristics which are distinctly different. You can have high self-confidence and low self-esteem, pretty common, or high self-esteem and low self-confidence, not so common. Now, clearly, self-esteem and self-confidence work as a team to influence how we live our lives and how our worldview is shaped. So when they are in balance, they're finely tuned and they have really positive impacts on all the areas in our life: work, communication, worship, play, yeah? But our lives have ups and downs, okay? And we receive negative and positive feedback. So while we might all strive for peace, prosperity, spirituality, individuality, equality in the human experience, we know that it's far from perfect, and we're not going to get all of the things all at once, unfortunately. So while we all have these experiences of ups and downs in life, it's really interesting to me as a therapist that how we can view ourselves so differently at the same world. So we all have a different view of the world, and our perspective and our view of the world drives how we behave in our daily lives. So essentially, this means we are the creators of our own perspective, okay? So someone can have an impact on our perspective. They can impact us in some ways, but they can't entirely change the way you will view your world. Only you can do that. I want to demonstrate this to you in this diagram that I'm showing you. When we change our viewpoint, we can see things completely differently. Now, I'm going to take you to the first picture here. Did you see the young woman's face turning sideways, her little ear and her nose and her eyelash? Or did you see the old woman, her big nose, her mouth, her chin, and her hat? I wonder which one you saw first. And that's just us taking a completely different viewpoint. Now here, Do you see the vase, beautiful vase, or do you see two faces looking at one another? Now, this is what I mean about we can kind of choose our perspective, okay? There's almost always a different way to view the same view, okay? Our minds are constantly interpreting, and we use our biases to interpret information which fits with our perspective and our belief system. So if you believe you saw an old lady, that's what you're going to see. If you believe you saw a young lady, that's what you're going to see. If you believe you saw a vase, that's your belief. If you believe you saw two faces, that's your belief, okay? Our perspective is our point of reference for all the experiences that we experience. We all have our own realities, okay? Really beautiful saying here, Anna's Nin, she said, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are, okay? Beautiful that is. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we see things as we are. We look at situations and events and interpret what other people say and do according to our own set of past experiences, your culture, your faith, your values, all of which help us to form our beliefs about ourselves, about others, and about the world in general. The meaning that we give to the event and the way we make sense of our world is based upon our own set of what I call core beliefs. So what do I mean by a core belief? The core belief system simply comprises of three things: how you think about yourself, how you think about others, and how you think about the world. Okay? Just three simple things. Our core belief system is formed and influenced by quite a few things: our past experiences, childhood upbringing, culture, faith, values, current circumstances, our character traits, including genetic influences, okay? Our minds are constantly trying to make sense of our world, forming judgments, opinions about every situation and every interaction. Those judgments and opinions will be affected by our central core belief system. The best way to understand this is to recognize we are all looking at the world through what I call a unique lens, okay? And everybody has their own personal prescription glasses, their own personal lens. Sometimes this lens can be a little bit distorted, and our perception of the way we might view things can be damaging to our self-esteem. Let me just share a little bit here, a diagram of what I mean. In this example, this person might believe that the world is a dangerous place and that they are useless and unlovable and people won't like them if they don't try to please people, okay? So this could come from a childhood script, and this is their core belief, okay, that people are not going to like them. So they're now looking through this prescription lens and they enter a situation up here, and that situation is going to create their behavior, a thought, their emotions and their responses to that. Now, our behaviours and emotions, our emotions might affect our behaviours and our behaviours might affect our emotions, just as our emotions can affect thoughts and can affect our behaviour and vice versa. So you see, this is what we call a vicious cycle. This cycle can go backwards and forwards and around, and unless we put an intervention in there to break that cycle, then we're going to keep staying and remaining in this. So somewhere up here is a trigger that's been triggered. We're viewing something, a situation has happened, okay? So this is kind of what our lens looks like and how it kind of works, okay? So in this looks like their mind is interpreting situations with biases of perhaps I'm vulnerable, others might hurt me, and this is dangerous and I'm useless and unlovable, okay? This person's mind is working overtime to make any contrary information fit with their lens and their biases. So now what I want you to do is I want you to imagine there's a gatekeeper, a centurion, a guard that is guarding your belief system, and that guard carries all the biases and only allows information or evidence that fits your belief system to enter. Now, if the gatekeeper is there rejecting any contrary evidence or information which doesn't fit with our bias, that's going to make life pretty difficult. Essentially, this means that we might be distorting information and rearranging that information to fit our bias, which in turn can affect our self-esteem. Now, unfortunately, if we keep on doing this, our belief systems remain unchanged in spite of apparently contrary evidence being out there, okay, that this is perhaps not true, what our lens is showing us. Now, if we're going to be able to work on our self-esteem, we need a new reasonable gatekeeper, which allows the logical mind to come into play, okay? A logical mind is that balanced part of us that comprises of our inner knowledge, intuition, and spiritual teachings from the Saviour. So we can look at our distressing thoughts with a rational, logical part of the mind. This allows our emotional mind to challenge the negative opinions we might hold, and with more reasonable, logical mindset, which is in line with the Saviour's teaching, we can kind of put our emotional mind drives and our opinions into a more fact-based looking at things. So if we choose to employ a reasonable gatekeeper and we choose to be open to change, as the Lord has asked us to look at changing ourselves and where we can improve ourselves, then we're going to be looking to give our logical mind to help it to make sense of given situations, okay? So we might want to stand back a little bit more, be aware of the bigger picture, and just be aware of what might be affecting. So I call this in therapy taking the helicopter viewpoint. For all of us as members of the church, we could call this taking an eternal perspective, as this is often much more helpful, okay? So all individuals will, of course, have their own belief systems and biases, and they'll look at things in different ways. Now, as members of the church, we have the same belief system, and this enables us to seek support from other members of church and church leaders. So we can learn to be more aware of our own belief systems and how it affects us, and consider how others might see the same situation quite differently. So we want to look at our logical minds. That's the balanced part of us. It comprises of our knowledge, intuition, our spiritual selves. When our logical mind and emotional mind and spiritual self come together in unison, we could describe this as a part of us that just knows that inner truth, okay? So as we learn to challenge those unhelpful thoughts, those biases around our self-esteem, this can change our perspective, give us a new prescription lens, and we can begin to see things in a more balanced and a more realistic way. And we start to discover that the situations and people can actually be interpreted differently to the way we would normally presume to interpret those things. So this can lead us to modify our core belief system and change our unhelpful biases and bring about lasting and positive change for the self-esteem and confidence. So let's have a look at our biases. So here is a lovely slide, and I want you to look here, and you can see three different people, cats, lions, looking in a mirror, but each one of them, they're seeing something different. Only one of them is actually seeing what they're actually looking at. They're interpreting what they're looking at. So we can sometimes see ourselves as something that we're not when we're better, and vice versa. Or do we really have this kind of, yeah, this is who I am, and I can accept that, and I can be compassionate to who I am, because this is where we want to be. And a mirror, it's a great metaphor for self-confidence and self-esteem, depending on the perspective you take while looking in the mirror, of course. Now, I want to ask you consider three questions here, just in your mind. So I have three questions. First question I have for you is, what do you rely on to feel good about yourself? What do you rely on to feel good about yourself? Have a think about that. The second question is, do you prioritize how you see yourself or how others see you? So do you prioritize how you see yourself or how others see you? And number three is, what is your source of validation? Is it external, people saying good things about you, or is it internal, you saying good things to yourself about yourself? And why do you think this might matter? Let's just click on and talk a little about self-esteem. Now, self-esteem. What do you think the common denominator in every interaction that you have with other people around you is? Well, interestingly, it's you. You are the common denominator of every interaction. Most of us might get our validation from what's important to us. So this is where we can get our influence. So we can get it from interactions with other people or ourselves, okay? But most of us spend a great deal of time worrying about how we speak, listen and respond and act and react to others, or how much they give us. So if we're spending a lot of time worrying about what other people think of us, we're not really spending time doing the same with ourselves, are we? So I want to question you again. How much time do you invest in doing the same with yourself? So while you're spending all of your time here reacting and trying to support other people, how much time do you invest in yourself? Okay. Now, without question, one of the most important relationships we can develop in ourselves is the one with ourselves. Yet we spend every waking moment generally nurturing relationships at the expense of our own internal relationship with ourselves, at great cost to our emotional, physical, spiritual health. Taking time to replenish ourselves is absolutely vital if we're going to be able to function well in all areas of our lives, okay? Now, we are constantly bombarded by image, subliminal ads, messages that kind of take us further and further away from what I call self-acceptance, gratitude, and love. If you cannot love and give time to yourself, how can you expect others to do the same? What example are you setting to people around you? So I want you to think that each minute that you give yourself that helps you to build your physical, emotional, and spiritual self will lead you to a happier, healthier life and actually better self-esteem. So simply put, you'll be in a much better place if you're able to do this, to do the Lord's work. Now, we have two forms of self-esteem where it's formed from, okay? It's external and internal. Now, if we are externally motivated, you can see here that your self-confidence, self-esteem is shaped by lots of circumstances, okay? Some of these things are out of our control. Our ideas, our beliefs, ourselves are often created via repeated experiences, okay? These ideas have enormous impact on how our character traits are developed, really. They determine when you feel really secure, what we think is funny, who you're attracted to, your spiritual belief system, and virtually kind of every other component in our lives, okay? So how we store these beliefs, unfortunately, it's a bit random and often it's very illogical. And as a result of this, we all kind of have difficulty examining why we see our lives and surroundings in the way we do. It doesn't always make sense to us. We struggle sometimes with that. So how we paint our reality is influenced sometimes as well by our culture, by our genes, by our faith, certainly, most definitely by early childhood experiences and life circumstances. Our body chemistry, including our safe place hormone, serotonin, can be altered due to genetic or cellular variations, and this can affect our early development and self-esteem. Our temperament is also linked directly to our genetic makeup. So some of us are naturally more cautious, reserved, and some of us are much more outgoing. So a number of individual life occurrences and experience may also lead us to feelings of insecurity and sometimes feelings of maybe unworthiness, such as significant trauma, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, all severely inhibits the development of healthy self-esteem. So difficult or stressful life events can have a great impact on us, okay? And what they can do is they can lead to sort of, I suppose, different types of self-esteem. So I'm going to share with you 4 types here this evening. We've got the critical overthinker. They ruminate, they catastrophize everything and every situation, okay? So, and we've got the shamer. They're hard on themselves. Nothing's ever good enough. But they kind of understand they're being hard on themselves, and usually they're easy on others. This one I deal with all the time in therapy, the comparison maker. They will just look at someone else and they'll measure everything that they do against someone else, not realizing that actually they are unique and the other person is unique. And then we have, frequently, I come up at this in my practice, is the worried warrior, very fearful of challenge, lots of inner turmoil, lots of anxiety, okay? So, what each of these all have in common, these types of self-esteem, is that they're external forces, okay? And often external forces are sort of like, they're out of our control somewhat sometimes, okay? They're focusing on the external, they're focused on what people think, they're focused on what others would say about them and how they're viewed, okay? Now, most of us, fortunately, we come into the world with pretty high self-esteem. And as our minds and bodies grow and develop, we learn that from others. We learn that others might withhold their affection, they might withhold their love from us, okay? And in turn, this creates a disordered way of thinking about our personal value or our worthiness in the eyes of others. So without emotional guidance from a caregiver, we're left to develop and rely on coping skills such as predicting other people's behaviours. We might become, obviously, the critical overthinker if we do that, who ruminates, okay? There are lots of unfortunate circumstances and consequences of living life motivated by these external forces that we see. But luckily, we human beings, we have this innate ability to adapt and change if we decide to. We become who we think we are in reality. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we let negative thoughts shape our reality, we filter out the information that confirms our negative beliefs. We adopt the irrational thought pattern. We keep the gatekeeper in place. We don't remove them, and we develop a lack of motivation really to change as well. And that impacts our ability to set really good goals and realistic goals. But if we stop giving mental space to our discouraging beliefs and start to consider what the future might look like if our biggest problems were solved, we might then ask ourselves this really famous question. It's called the miracle question. It's from solution focused therapy. Let's click onto that. The question goes like this. It says, what if you woke up tomorrow morning and a miracle had happened? The problem that has been plaguing you has been resolved and it's completely gone. Now, the idea here is to allow yourself to think of a huge range of possibilities instead of focusing on the same problem in the same way, okay? And I'm sure you want to be more successful in all areas of your life in order to achieve your goal. You also need to believe that you can learn to improve, accomplish milestones that will take you where you want to go. Some of the things that you set might be self-improvement. It doesn't matter what it is, okay? You need to identify that. So you've got your problem, have a think about that. And then we're going to look at the next steps. So once this problem's gone, I need you to consider this. If that problem was gone, how would you see your life change once that problem had disappeared? How would you see your life change? Okay. Now, the other question I want is, how would your life actually be different if that problem was gone? It's interesting, isn't it? How would you feel when you woke up, when that problem was gone and it was resolved? You certainly would feel differently. And then, how would people close to you respond? Would they notice? Perhaps they would say your life seems different and tell you how they think it's different. Would people say your life was better once that problem was completely gone? And the last one here I want you to consider is, once the problem was gone, what would you do next? And that's always a really interesting one in therapy. Once your problem's gone, what would you do next? Really, really interesting. So if you're not sure, and sometimes people aren't sure where you need to start, then this next slide is going to just briefly show you how and where you could start. So this is about your strengths and your weaknesses, okay? There's a strong correlation between low self-esteem and struggling to include self-care practices into one's life, okay? Oftentimes, this lack of self-care leads to sadness, anxiety, and low motivation, okay? So practicing a healthy ritual of self-care is often second-guessed with selfishness, but it's not selfish. We tend to prioritize everything and everyone else before ourselves. And we become overworked, overtired, and overstressed because we are overdoing it. To become more balanced and self-assured, we need to stop ignoring our needs and begin to place our well-being higher on our to-do list. This is a really good chart. You can look at how hopeful you feel and score yourself, 1 being not very hopeful and 5 completely hopeful. And you might say, I'm at a 3 here. And your self-esteem, you're a self-esteem workshop, maybe you're at a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. I don't know. You're on this workshop, I'm guessing you're not a 5. But you can see if your hopefulness is at 3 and your self-esteem is at 2, then we've got a slight deficit here and we've got more strength in hopefulness than we have self-esteem. Ideally, we are looking to have the perfect circle, perfect threes, perfect fours. I promise you that's not ever going to happen. I don't know anybody that's got the perfect circle. What this does is it shows you that if you're on a 3 in hopefulness and you're on a 2 in self-esteem, that you want to just do a little bit work here and you want to just hold the fort there. And then you want to try and bring these things up. So if you've got more confidence, hold the confidence, don't let it go, okay? If you're really good with emotional and mental health and you look after yourself and you do yoga, meditation, you might be right up here as a 5. We don't want to lose the 5. We just want to keep nurturing you up and up and up. And hopefully we need that perfect 5, okay? This is just a really good way to find out where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. Now, this is the favourite part of the workshop when we talk about the inner critic, which is probably where I'm going to get a lot of questions at the end. Now, your inner critic is a devious little being that capitalizes on your discomfort, your fear and stress. Your inner critic is mostly a subconscious monologue of judgment and personal attacks. Your inner critic is most active when you want to take a risk or step outside of your comfort zone. Your inner critic uses powerful words which have deep, distinctive personal meaning to you in your life. Many of us assume these thoughts and critics are accurate simply because we're thinking them. Your inner critic is masterful at helping you to ruminate and keeps you stuck in regret, judgments, and blaming and catastrophizing. And we can get stuck in what I call a little vicious cycle, okay, of your inner monologue. Now, I'm just going to take you through these little, the different types. There are 7 types I'm going to take you through now. Most of us know negative self-talk can be extremely toxic, okay? Studies have indicated that most common effect of listening and believing our inner critic are feelings of anxiety and depression, problems in relationships, especially around conflict, lack of motivation, and what we call caged thinking, resulting in the belief that you cannot stop something, and perfectionism, which is a terrible one that a lot of us get stuck in, suggesting that great is not good enough, okay? Now, our inner critic is one of the most difficult and persistent mental wellness issues we all face. Importantly, our inner critic has multiple personalities. Most of us have a number. And most of you won't just have one that I'll show you, you have 1 or 2 or 3, who knows, okay? Most of us have a number of self-judging inner critics, and they all have different motivations for existing, okay? So Early and Wees have identified 7 types of inner critics that most of us struggle with. So these are the common ones. So here's our first one, the perfectionist, okay? The perfectionist inner critic will say, try harder. You will never do it right. You're not planning to leave it like that, are you? Your work is worthless. The perfectionist is trying to protect you from rejection. A great way to do that, or so the perfectionist critic says, is to never make the mistake in the first place. So if you're an artist and you don't like the way your latest painting is shaping up, it's no use, just bin it. Don't try to look for a new direction and go over it. That inner perfectionist critic will tell you to throw it away, start again. The perfectionist demands this. The inner voice probably learned how to talk this way from someone really important to you. If you listen carefully to that critic, you'll probably be able to identify whose voice it truly belongs to. It could be an unhelpful teacher, parent, a sibling, anybody. Living under living under the never good enough standard, if you like, of perfection, that can feel like a major blow to your confidence and self-esteem, okay? Perfectionism is a prison because it has the ability to capture us in this ultimate self-defeating loop. Perfectionism is one of the most rigid and destructive human personality types, and it seeps into every aspect of our collective world consciousness, believe it or not. The way we look, what we do, level of education. Next one I want to tell you about is the inner controller. The inner controller said, oh, you did it again. Shame on you. you've no willpower, you're never going to break free of this, okay? The inner controller cannot abide setbacks. If you have failed at your diet once before, the inner controller will tell you you're going to fail again. The inner controller becomes that very disappointed and angry at you when you try to overcome unhelpful urges. At times, it might feel like the inner controller is really trying to harness your best impulses, but it does this by trying and failing to stop your worst ones. So especially, so what you relate, this could relate to things like overeating, not exercising, addiction, and sex. Taskmaster, next one for us. This tells you that you are lazy and says, get to work already. Rest is for the weak. You won't achieve anything unless you work harder. Work, 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 and work some more. And when you're finally done, you can reward yourself with working more. Some more work. The taskmaster wants you to be successful, but its tactics are expectations that can be really unreasonable. And if it keeps grinding at you, it just keeps you at the grindstone, basically. And it's bound to achieve really the opposite of what it actually wants. You fight back by putting off what needs to be done in the end. And with that push and pull of the taskmaster telling you to do work, work more, work harder, eventually the procrastinator awakens in us. And then it begins to feel impossible to ever do anything or feel good about yourself at all or any of your accomplishments, okay? Now, we also have the underminer. This is depicted in the picture. Don't even bother, you'll never be good enough, okay? Don't even try, you're gonna fail. It's pointless, absolute waste of time. Don't even waste your time. The underminer would really rather you never left the safety of your own home, that you never encounter failure. And if you try that, the underminer is willing to play dirty, really. It wants to get what it wants. The underminer will say, stay safe. And it also wants you to stay small. It takes direct shots at your confidence and your esteem to ensure you never feel good enough about yourself. So you never try to accomplish anything. It just keeps you small and stops you, puts fear in you that you'll never be good enough. This next one's a very sad one. The destroyer is brutal. It will say, you should have never been born. You're just a big failure. You're just worthless. It will tell you that you could have stayed safest of all by never really existing in the first place. It crushes every shred of confidence and esteem and any feelings of basic worth that a person has. The destroyer doesn't just want you to think you're not worth anything. It wants you to think that everyone else thinks that too. Many destroyers are born from terrible early life circumstances. If you ever feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with you, about taking up space in the world, then you've got a destroyer on your hands. The guilt tripper. How could you do this? You will regret this for the rest of your life. They'll never forgive you. You'll never forgive yourself. If you're familiar with lying in bed at night and replaying the one mean thing that you did at school, way back when in secondary school, over and over again, it's like your worst movie of all time showing on your mind in a theatre non-stop, then you've met the guilt tripper. Did you once make a mistake? Go against the grain. The guilt tripper will never, ever let you forget it. It may think it's protecting you from making mistakes again, but it's really all it's doing is stomping on your confidence and stomping on your self-esteem. And this can lead to the imposter syndrome, not feeling like yourself, feeling like a loser. Imposter syndrome can be defined as a collection of feelings and inadequacies that persist despite evidence that you have success, okay? Those with an imposter syndrome suffer from chronic self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override any feeling of success of external proof that they are competent, and it eats away at our self-esteem and it eats away at our confidence. The last one I want to show is the conformist. The conformist will say, don't make a fool of yourself, keep your head down, do as you're told. What will people think of you? You know what would be great? It It'll be great if everybody liked you all of the time. And the conformist has a great plan for how to accomplish this. Never disagree with anyone. If, say, your teacher or your friend or university lecturer wants you to study English, but you like economics, the conformist pushes you and keeps you, says, no, you need to keep the teacher happy, study English, study English. The conformist would rather that your inner self, which is waiting to break free, never happens, because someone might not like you if you broke free. The conformist wants you to be accepted, which is all we all want to some extent, but the conformist would strictly hold you in a life where you don't actually want, never allowing you to develop self-confidence or self-esteem, or even be true to yourself. So we share with you a cycle. Now, our inner monologue develops right alongside our ability to speak, okay? This theory emerged with a Russian psychologist, Vygotsky. Some of you may have studied it. And he stated that children learn and develop from their caregiver. And we develop this in a monologue, really. Now, something really interesting about children and the way we learn. So as children, we are really taught that the many feeling words that we use to translate in our internal words, we're not actually taught that as children how to translate how we feel in our internal words, okay? And so it's difficult for us. We don't have that monologue for that. But I want to talk to you about the different types of monologue that we have. So yeah, I will teach you that. I think, I know we're running out of time really. But I guess the main message I want to give here is that we need to learn to choose what we're going to think and how we're going to think, and not be on autopilot. We can't unconsciously react. Here, our negative thoughts, they're actually optional, yet, and we can change the way we think and refocus the way we think. This cycle is something that some of us have probably all thought at some point, okay? And we need to challenge this idea, okay? All of these ideas are all challengeable, okay? And that inner monologue that comes from us, that we're talking to ourselves and we're feeding into a place that we don't want to be when we're having negative inner monologues and saying things. And most of us don't even question the way we're thinking or that inner monologue, but it's really important we question that inner monologue. The first step is that inner monologue is to catch out the critic, one of those 7 critics I've already talked about, okay? Now, we need to understand that it's really easy for us to just let our subconscious make decisions for us, okay? But we don't really want to be doing that. We want to think a bit more. So we don't want to be in a position where we're in submission all the time to those around us because we want to feel good about ourselves. What I want to do is I want to show you how we base some of these monologues that we have on our belief systems and on our value systems. So over here, our belief system, we might believe we're not good enough. I can never do what I want. I need to be successful. Lying's never okay. This might be somebody's belief system. And this might be their value. We might really, really value all of these things. Our values are what we call here an ever-running engine of our self-confidence and self-esteem. So our values originate from our beliefs about people, places, and things that we hold in high regard. The core of our value is rooted in particular belief, most often related to worth. Now, worth of behaviour. Now, idea or life decisions determined by our kind of various cultural norms. Our values, on the other hand, they guide us to judge what's right and wrong, and our beliefs. Values are not that easy. They're not really based on empirical evidence. They're more, sometimes not even on rational thought. Whereas beliefs, we tend to be able to adjust our beliefs more easily than our values, okay? So beliefs can be adjusted or changed with persuasion, time, or evidence. Values are pretty much resistant to that change. Our values are that ever-running engine, as I said. So how can we begin to understand when we're having unhelpful thoughts, and how can we spot those thoughts and start to think differently? So I'm going to share with you a way that you can do that. This is you'll get these slides at the end. This is a thought record sheet, and on here you'll see a little link here. Okay, and I'll take you straight to the sheet. So you have here, you remember at the beginning, that lens, that situation, what happened with who, where and how. Then you can rate that from 0 to 100, okay? What was you feeling? Angry, upset, tearful, had a tummy ache? What did you notice? Maybe your fists or sweating, or maybe your brow, or your tense in your shoulders. And then what thought went through your mind? What disturbed you? What was difficult? You know, what triggered you? How did you respond, okay? And we have to put in there. Then over here, this is the good bit. This is where you think about, I had the unhelpful thought, and what could have I done differently? Okay, I could have maybe took a breath. I could have done some meditation. What would have been a better reaction? Okay, and what, once you've had that thought, how do you diffuse the technique? So you rate, so what did you do? What could you have done? And how might that have made you feel? So what could you do differently? And how would that make you feel? Now, this thought record sheet is fantastic. I use it quite a bit in therapy to help clients understand that some of these unhelpful thoughts, we can quite easily change them, okay? And it's really good to change. But that's one thing, okay? But what we really need to do is we sometimes need to look at sometimes our communication, okay? There are 4 types, 4 communicational skills, okay, that all kind of interact here and come together, okay? When we have, or we don't, well, I suppose when we start to learn about communication in our early years, we learn that through our intimate relationships, our caregivers, okay? If our families or caregivers lacked healthy communication skills and we didn't learn and practice these skills, it's very likely our self-confidence, self-esteem are going to be very negatively affected. Now, the way we communicate reveals how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our self-esteem. So if you're able to speak honestly, assertively and clearly and listen with compassion, you've got great skills. These skills are ability to know and understand your needs, desires, feelings, and to verbalize them when setting boundaries. Now, the more intense and intimate a relationship is, the more difficult it is to practice all of these communicational skills. And that can sometimes lead us into unhealthy ways of coping, which we might then find our inner critic popping out. So, or unhelpful thinking starts to emerge, okay? So we don't only want to communicate with words, as we know, we communicate with our eyes, with our voice, with our inflections, with our body. We really communicate in lots of ways. So I want you to think, you know, if you're going to challenge yourself, do you verbalize what your needs are? Do you ask questions to gain clarity about feelings? Do you ask others about their opinions? Do you share your opinions? Do you show an interest in people and giving them your undivided attention? Do you consider that your way of doing things is most effective? Now, sometimes it can be really challenging to communicate to people and our inner critics can start to talk to us, or we can find that people seem to be taking advantage of us in certain ways. And this is where it becomes really imperative that we have healthy boundaries. Now, when we think of boundaries, we think, oh, you know, something that can't be crossed, but actually it's a preference. It's not a fence that can't be crossed, okay? And you can save yourself a lot of trouble if you know when to say no, actually, because life's messy, okay? And boundaries are one of the messiest parts of life. So knowing what you will and won't tolerate allows you to avoid getting into a situation where boundaries might get crossed from the start of a relationship, okay? You need to teach people how to treat you. The key to successful boundary setting is having clear expectations and learning the power of your own voice. A boundary which is not verbalized is not a boundary. People don't know if they've crossed a boundary if you don't tell them that you have one, okay? No matter how much we think others should know what we're thinking, they simply can't always know where that line is. Healthy boundaries help us to develop self-esteem and help us to live within our value system and our beliefs. I want to show you an example of a healthy boundary. This is a good example of somebody that's late for work all the time. I feel frustrated. You are late for meetings. I don't like repeating information. I need you to be on time. Please let me know if you cannot make the meeting and I'll cancel and reschedule. This is a really good way to make a boundary. Sometimes people struggle. Okay, we're coming towards the end and the question time is on its way. So We can be both bold and loving as we make changes in our lives and follow the Saviour. It is only through the Saviour that we can truly change and grow towards that divine potential we all have developing healthy self-esteem. Okay, so healthy self-esteem is prerequisite to helping others to do the same. You need healthy self-esteem to help others. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by him. It is his power that can make weak things become strong. It was faith in the atoning power that enabled Alma the Younger to change. We can teach others to rely on the Saviour so they too can have his refining power in their lives. Okay? Change takes time. We must all continue in patience if we're to be perfected. Jesus had patience with others and continues to teach even those who oppose him, testifying of his role given by him and the Father and answering their questions. We can be patient with others and encourage them to be patient with themselves, but we first need to be patient with ourselves. It is in his power that we can make weak things become strong. It was faith in the atonement that, as I said, helped Alma. So here's a little thing that we need to do. We just need to do these things here. Understand to be patient, it takes time. Exercise faith. Pray if you need to work on your self-esteem. Be patient. Give encouragement to yourself and others. And most certainly, lean on the atonement. So don't give up when things get difficult. Don't be afraid to invite change into your life. It's only through the Saviour we can truly change. We all have the potential to change and build healthy self-esteem. Here's a lovely quote that I want you to think about. There are two primary choices in life. The choice is yours tonight. You made the choice to attend this workshop, and now you have the choice to work on your esteem. Only you can do it. You now have some tools to do this with. I hope you make a good choice. So there are two primary choices in life: to accept conditions as they are, as they exist, or to accept the responsibility to change them. Now, don't forget, while you're doing this, you have the Saviour's love to guide you every step of the way and on your journey. Now, also, I think it's really good to understand life is going to keep happening. Life's messy. We're not going to be suddenly forever immune of our fears, of our self-doubts, of any uncontrollable things that happen in the world, especially in the pandemic. It's during difficult times we experience great growth in our self-esteem. Now, I hope you can now see and understand it is possible to nurture self-esteem, whatever your circumstances, and that you can see yourself not as you are today, but rather as you can become. The other thing I want you to think about is what's most relevant. This is your journey, and it's progress that we're looking for, not perfection. And we have to each of us find our own unique way to move forward that works for us. When you send these slides through, you'll see all these extra resources here that you'll get, some church resources. I'm going to stop sharing my slides and I'll now take some questions from you.
Thank you. And another one that came in. So why is communication more difficult when relationships are more intense or intimate?
It's a bit like getting hijacked, really. When I'm talking to a client, I'll show them this. I think you can see me quite nicely. I'll show them this hand and this hand, and I say, look, this is your right brain and this is your left brain, okay? And they're together, and we know that they're there together. And what happens is the right side of us is quite logical and it's working fine, and then suddenly the left brain kicks in, and that's where all our emotions are held. And what happens is the left brain comes over here and it literally hijacks the logic of our right brain. So we are left really kind of impeded. And that's Neanderthal man. That's where the cortisol levels, the stress hormone, it uproots, and it kind of makes us feel threatened. It makes us feel fearful, perhaps fear of losing them, fear of a breakdown. And we can't actually think straight, unfortunately. And so the more intense, the more we're invested emotionally in that relationship, that actually sadly makes it more difficult for us. Does that answer your question?
hopefully. Another one. So can you give more examples of healthy boundaries?
Mm-hmm. This one comes up quite a lot. And I think the problem is that we feel that we want to be a good friend to everybody. And so I think if you feel that you wouldn't ask somebody to do that, so if somebody asks you to do something you're not comfortable with, in terms of, I don't know, there's just so many boundaries. I like to go with what you feel. So if you feel that you're being put on, if you feel that you don't have the time to give, it's saying, actually, you know, I love you as a friend, but I can't come around and watch Netflix at this moment in time because I have an essay to write. And if I don't write this essay, then I'm going to fail my degree. And I hope you understand. So it's a little bit about giving the reason why and showing them that you're not just kind of pushing someone out of your life because you don't fancy it. Or just saying that, you know, maybe you might not be in a good mood. Maybe, you know, you suffer from anxiety and you're feeling really anxious and it just feels too much for you. It's about verbalizing anything that you're not comfortable with. And with boundaries, you also have to understand that, as I said, it's a preference. And boundaries are so key to having good relationships. They're so key in every aspect of our lives. If we are boundaried in our most loving relationships, those relationships will have great longevity. They will move us into the eternities. They will help and sustain us as families. They will be greatly, you will have respect, you will have self-respect, you will be heard, you will be listened to. You won't be what I call a dumper. You won't be dumping everything on someone and then just disappearing. And if somebody is dumping on you, you need to tell them and say, actually, when I come to you, you know, sometimes I can't hear those things. It's tricky for me. And I wonder if we could have a moment off of that right now. So boundaries are literally it's just how you feel. You have to express that. It has to be given in a format that is kind, understanding, and that you are not suffering from that. You remember the first part of the presentation talked about, when we give too much, do we worry about what people think? Do we worry about what people are going to say, what we're wearing? Do we worry about, actually, if you're doing that, are you with the right group? Are you with the right crowd? Probably not. And maybe you need to reassume, and maybe you're trying to fit into a patch of something that isn't actually truly who you are. You need to be yourself, because it would be exhausting. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Another one. Is there a quick thought process I can use to silence the inner critic when I find myself in a negative thought spiral?
There is something I call the just stop technique. It takes less than 30 seconds, and it really helps you. Now, what you can't do with a thought is you absolutely cannot say to yourself, don't think this, okay? Because all you're going to do is think about what you're telling yourself not to think about, okay? So what we really need to do, we need to do something really good. So I'm going to do a quick experiment with you all. I want you all to think about whatever you're sitting on, whether it's the seat, the bed, whatever you're doing, whatever you're resting. And I want you to really concentrate on your weight, on whatever's supporting you, right? Or even if it's your feet on the floor, okay? So all of you that have done that, what I've just done to you is I've helped you to suddenly refocus your thoughts, right? So you didn't even pay attention to what you were sitting on 10 seconds ago. And just like that, I took your thoughts straight to there. So the beautiful thing here in the just stop technique is to think to yourself, imagine a stop sign, a red stop sign, then in your mind's eye, shout stop, and then you refocus. And that's how easy it is to refocus. You can literally go somewhere else. You choose where you put your thing. You are not your thoughts. This is something that I'm really, really keen to kind of get across, is that your thoughts are just thoughts. They're not real. They're actually not real. They're just thoughts, okay? We think they're real because we think, oh, when I'm done here, I'm going to go and get a glass of water. And because we get a glass of water, we think the thought is a concrete thing and it's real. But sometimes you might be sitting there, I'm going to get a glass of water, and it never happens because it was just a thought anyway, and it's not real. So you are not your thoughts. If you pay attention to those negative thoughts, you will start to kind of really work with that and start to kind of, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's really key in the just stop technique that you refocus on positive things. Often I say, I usually have another workshop I do here on stress, and I usually say, look, focus on the beautiful puppy, focus on the beautiful family here. You focus, and you know how easy, I just showed you how easy it is to refocus. That's all it requires. But I make it sound easy. What's not easy, it's like a muscle, and you have to keep on refocusing and refocusing, and you have to build up that muscle so that actually you can refocus, and actually it's really difficult for that negative thought to keep coming back in.
Thanks for that, Coral. So what do you do if self-care is high but your self-esteem is still low?
That's a really good question. I would say that probably something in the childhood there has happened for that particular individual, and that may need to talk to a good friend, a good peer, or maybe even a therapist. Because if you're putting all the work in and you're still having this inner critic, you might need a vital bit of professional support there to help unpack those iceberg thoughts and those inner monologue from childhood.
Thank you. And then another one that's come in: if you've been sexually abused as a child, do you have to deal with that before you can love yourself?
CSA is a really, really, my heart goes out to the individual, and I'm sorry to hear that, but CSA is something that's close to my heart. It's something that I'm specialising in currently at the moment. And I think that you have to definitely deal with the CSA for sure. It's a very damaging thing to happen to somebody. And it will most definitely affect self-esteem. It most definitely usually leave you in a very anxious, depressed state, and it most definitely will leave you with deficits. And therapy will give you what we call reparative work, which is kind of reparenting, and you will feel really comfortable and not judged by that therapist, and really supported, and they will give you tools and tasks and ways to keep yourself safe, so that that traumatic, you have to refeel it, unfortunately, so that when you are feeling it, you know you're not there, but then you can then process that. Once that's been processed, it'd probably be a lot easier to do the self-esteem work. But I would hope that you, that individual would be able to still work on their self-esteem, because what's happened to them is not their fault, and they need to understand that. Unfortunately, it's a very detailed piece of work that needs to be done, and be a long-term piece of work. But I think it's really important to take the time to understand that if anything has happened to anybody of that deprived, anything at all has happened to anyone, any trauma, a divorce, any loss whatsoever, that you can rebuild. Remember, we're creative human beings, but when it is of such a significant trauma, it probably is best to seek professional help to help that individual to move towards really good, healthy self-esteem. But yes, it's possible. It is a journey.
Thank you for that. And then another question that's come in: how can I rebuild my self-esteem after experiencing domestic violence?
It's very similar, unfortunately, to this last one, because any trauma, you need to understand, domestic violence isn't that person's fault. It's really sad that that's happened to that person, and that whoever was the giver of that, the persecutor, that they've become a victim of that. But you have to get out of the victim cycle, really, and you have to take care of yourself. I think the therapy again here would be necessary for this individual, so they could find the support that they need. Domestic violence is it's very difficult, because the perpetrator is usually somebody that you love, and it becomes very complex and very conflicting for that individual, and they would generally feel very unlovable, or that something is wrong with them. But there is nothing wrong with them. They are lovable. The partner they had was very damaged and very wrong in what happened to them, and that's not okay what happened to them. And don't let that define them. That's not to define them, because that's not who you are. That's just, unfortunately, who you fell in love with and how that pain has come out. So again, good that you come on the workshop, but possibly, yes, it might need some support with some therapy.
Thank you. And then our last it's not a question, it's a comment. Can Coral move in with me? I need her in my life daily. So why?
very kind. I'll take that as a super compliment of the workshop and that you found it useful. And I hope everybody has come on and found this useful. I could have spoken for hours and hours. Yeah, so I think it's really, there are lots of us, there are lots of advisors. The church takes this work very, very seriously. It's growing exponentially. We're all area advisors, and we're Frankfurt, we all work under Frankfurt, and there are many of us now. I think there's something like 60 European advisors that working in Europe. We just had a conference, so there are lots of us, and it's, yeah, I mean, I think you just got sometimes just take a leap of faith. There is a lovely book actually. I think I've just got it here. Yeah, this, if you want to, if you want to invest in yourself a little bit of money, it's called 5 Weeks to Self-Confidence. This is a great book. It's written in a lovely format, and I run a 5-week workshop. I work at a university when I'm not doing this, and I run the workshop from this book. You could literally read the book and take yourself through it. Lynn Matty writes it in a very beautiful, understandable format. It's not tricky to read, it's not tricky to understand. And she talks a lot, but you'll find all the inner critics I've talked about in this book. So if you want to, treat yourself and look after yourself, then I'd really recommend this book. It's a great read, and it's not difficult, and the writing's not too small. So always a plus.
Thanks, Coral. And just really, really quickly, just in terms of, I guess, therapists, it is possible to have online meetings as well as in person. Is that correct?
For therapy?
Yeah.
That's all we can do at the moment in the pandemic. All of my work in the past year's all been online. So yeah, absolutely online. And actually, we were kind of negative to it as therapists, thinking, oh yeah, we don't have the person in the room, but actually it's been amazing. If you want to do the work, you can do it online, and you can just work with anybody then around the world, and that makes it's really opened the door to, I think, for other people to access LDS therapists, actually, because we're all working pretty much online. And if you want an LDS therapist, then yeah, you can do it online. Now, I think in your area, I think the person that's assigned up your end, I can't remember, but I mean, I can send a list of therapists through if people need LDS therapists that have been recommended. Now, normally when I do a workshop, I get a bit inundated. I just want to warn you all, I am full. I don't have space in my therapy. I have a waiting list, unfortunately. But if you don't have money as well, you, yes, I can definitely send you the list of therapists at the end of this. If you don't have money as well, sometimes your therapy can be paid for by your bishop if you cannot afford it. One thing that is problematic is that when you've had CSA, child sexual abuse, is that you don't actually want to go and tell a bishop that, and that is something we're trying to work on here, because if you're being financed by the bishop, it's really tricky to try and tell a bishop, who's often a male, or always a male, that actually this has happened to you. So that's perhaps our biggest stumbling block, if you've got CSA in your past and you don't actually want your bishop to know, but it's difficult, really. It's really, really difficult, and you need support, and you need to be financed for it. That kind of work is very long term as well. So, you're generally in therapy for quite a while.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been really great to hear your words.